The lecture hall smelled like chalk dust and something faintly sweet, the breathing secretions of the Devani students, who made up nearly a third of the seats. 43 students from 11 different species sat in the tiered rows, and most of them were watching the human that he stood near the front of the room beside Professor Sova, who reached only to his shoulder. Rael Duno was not a large man by human standards, but in a room full of Devani and Thessi, he looked like something assembled for a different purpose. Broad through the chest, economical in how he held himself, like he was always slightly ready for something, even when there was nothing to be ready for. Professor Sova had introduced him simply. Former soldier, current graduate student, here to share a perspective on human conflict culture as part of their third-week module. You can begin whenever you are comfortable, she said. Rael looked at the room for a moment, not scanning it nervously, just looking the way someone looks at a landscape before deciding which way to walk. I was 17 the first time I saw someone die, he said. It was not in a war. It was in a flood back on Earth. A man got swept under trying to pull his dog out of the water. The room was quiet. I tell you that because people hear human soldier and they think we are comfortable with death. We are not. We are just familiar with it. Oro sat in the fourth row and wrote nothing in his notes. He was supposed to be recording key phrases for his weekly summary, but he could not stop watching Rael's hands. They were relaxed at his sides, completely still. Oro's own hands were gripping his note tablet tightly, and he had no reason to be nervous at all. Rael continued. He did not lecture. He spoke the way someone speaks when they have thought about something for a long time and no longer need to perform the thinking. He talked about Earth, about how almost everything on it, from the weather to the wildlife to the microbes in the soil, had been killing humans for as long as humans had existed. He talked about how that had not made humans violent. It had made them adaptive, problem solvers. He said the military had not taught him how to be dangerous. Earth had done that. The military had only taught him when not to beat at a Thessi student in the second row raised two of her four hands. Do you miss it? The military. Rael thought about it. I miss the clarity, he said. Out here, problems are more complicated. A small sound of nervous amusement moved through the room. Even Professor Sova made her quiet clicking laugh. Oro finally relaxed enough to write a note. He does not say what we expect him to say. Class was nearly over. Professor Sova was rising from her chair at the side of the room to begin the closing remarks. Students were capping their styluses, tucking away tablets. Rael had moved back toward the edge of the stage and was picking up the small bag he had brought with him. Worn canvas, military surplus, the kind of bag that had been used hard and cared for faithfully. Then the doors locked. IT was not a loud sound. Just a clean, mechanical thunk from the main entrance and both side corridors. The kind of sound that does not mean anything until the emergency lights turned from white to amber, and then it meant everything. 43 students went still. The maintenance door behind the presentation stage opened. A Brecken male stepped through. He was large even for his species, ceramic gray, plating across his shoulders and jaw, thick limbs, eyes that had the flat brightness of something running on desperation rather than reason. He was carrying a directed pulse weapon in each hand, military grade, and a broadcast node was clipped to his collar, already transmitting. "Nobody move," he said. His galactic standard was accented but clear. "I'm not here for most of you." His eyes found the human at the edge of the stage. Oro's blood went cold. Around him, the Devani students had folded, some curling instinctively, some pressing against each other, some making small sounds they could not help. The Thessi girl in the second row had all four hands pressed flat against her desk. Even the two Vekari students near the back, species known for their calm, had gone rigid. Oro turned to find Rael. Rael was standing exactly where he had been, bag in hand, eyes on the Brecken. He had not moved toward the door, had not crouched, had not pressed himself against the wall. He was just standing there, watching the armed male in the same quiet way he had watched the lecture hall when he first walked in, like he was assessing a landscape and deciding which way to walk. The Brecken raised one of the weapons toward him. "You," he said. "Human." "Yes," Rael said. His voice was completely level. Not brave, not defiant, just present, as though someone had asked him to confirm his name for a registration form. Oro realized his own hands were shaking. Rails were not. That was the moment Oro understood, without words, without any framework he had been taught, that whatever was about to happen, Rail Duno had already been somewhere worse than this, and he had come back from it. The broadcast was live. Garo, that was the name he gave first, loudly, to the node on his collar, wanted the station to know who he was. He had practiced this. His voice had the cadence of someone who had rehearsed the words so many times they had worn grooves into him. My name is Garo, of the Brecken colony on Marate Station. 3 years ago, the Galactic Union voted against the relief effort. My colony died, not from war, not from disaster, from a decision made in a clean room by people who were not hungry. Nobody moved. The amber lights made the lecture hall look like the inside of something biological, warm and close and wrong. Humans lobbied against that vote. They had trade interests. You all know this. The records exist. His upper plating flexed. A Brecken expression Oro recognized as grief wearing the clothes of rage. I'm not here to hurt students. I am here for the record. I am here so the galaxy watches what happens when you make that kind of decision and then just continue, as if nothing happened. He turned the weapon more directly toward Rail. On your knees. The room held its breath. Rail did not move, not defiantly, not theatrically. He simply did not respond to the instruction the way Garo expected, with immediate physical compliance, or with fear, or with argument. He looked at Garo the way you look at someone who has just said something you want to make sure you heard correctly before you respond. I heard you, Rail said 2 words. The same tone he had used to answer student questions 20 minutes ago. Garo's weapon arm tensed. I said knees. Now, I heard that too. Rail said that Oro's whole body wanted to scream at him. Get down. Give the man what he wants. Every survival instinct Oro had, and Devani had many, layered deep from a planet full of larger predators, was screaming the same instruction. Comply. Reduce the threat. Survive the moment. Rail was not following that instruction. Around Oro, the room had fractured into its biological responses. The 3 Devani in his row had folded themselves small. The Thessi student 2 seats over was absolutely motionless, a prey freeze so complete she had stopped visibly breathing. One of the younger students near the front had slipped off his chair entirely and was sitting on the floor without seeming to know how he had gotten there. Oro looked back at Rail and tried to understand what he was seeing. Rail's shoulders were level. His weight was even on both feet. The bag was still in his left hand. He had not dropped it, had not used it as a shield. His face held the same settled expression it had held during the lecture. The only difference was his eyes. They were more focused now, the way a lens focuses, not wider, but sharper. That he is not frozen, Oro realized. He is thinking. Marate Station, Rail said. I know what happened there. Then you know why you are here, Garo said. I know why you are here, Rail said. He shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, maybe half a step forward. Not enough to read as movement, just a redistribution. That is not the same thing. Garo's jaw plates ground together. This was not the scene he had built in his head. The human was supposed to be on the floor by now, and the broadcast was supposed to show something clear and terrible that the galaxy could not look away from. Instead, it was showing a man with a canvas bag having a conversation. You think talking to me changes anything? Garo said. I don't know yet, Rail said. That answer clearly confused Garo. He had expected either argument or pleading. He had not prepared for honest uncertainty stated in a calm voice. Nothing you say brings them back, Garo said, and something shifted in his voice, still dangerous, but cracked through with something older. He was speaking to the broadcast as much as to Rail, but the words were pulling him somewhere personal. No, Rail agreed. He took another non-step. Oro watched it happen and could not have told you, precisely, when Rail's position changed. It was as if the space between Rail and Garo had simply become slightly smaller without any specific moment of movement. Professor Sova, near the far wall, had her 4 hands folded in front of her. She was watching Rail. Her expression was one Oro had never seen on her before. Careful, focused, The look of someone watching something that required full attention. Garo suddenly raised the weapon higher. "Stop moving." "Okay," Rail said. He stopped. Immediately. No resistance. Oro realized he had been holding his breath for a long time. He let it out carefully, trying not to make sound. Garo was still holding the weapon level. But he was still talking. That was the thing. He had come in with the intention of a sharp, visible act, and instead he was standing in amber light, broadcasting to the station, in a conversation with a human who kept agreeing with him in ways that somehow made it very hard to do the next thing. Oro did not understand what Rail was doing, but he was becoming increasingly certain it was not nothing. There were 12 minutes of it. Oro knew because the emergency timer had appeared on the lecture hall's ceiling display when the doors locked, a Union safety protocol marking a lapse time for any responding units. 12 minutes, and security had not yet breached the hall. Later, Oro would learn that Liaison Pesh had been following procedure, confirming the broadcast, verifying weapons classification, waiting on authorization from 2 levels above his own. All technically correct. All completely useless that I in the hall. Rail Duno was asking questions, not negotiator questions. Not the kind Oro had studied briefly in his social dynamics course. Reflective language, de-escalation scripts, the careful formulas designed to reduce tension. Rail was asking the kind of questions you ask when you actually want to know the answers. "What was your work on, Mare?" He said. Garo's upper plate shifted. "Infrastructure, water, reclamation. Essential work," Rail said. It was Garo said. And then, as if the agreement had pulled something loose. "We had expanded 3 times in 6 years. There were children born there who had never been anywhere else. It was not a temporary station. It was home." "How many were left when the systems started failing?" 1,100. The Union knew. "We sent data every week." His voice had changed. The rehearsed anger was still there, but something underneath it was surfacing, something that had not been in the speech he had practiced. "They requested more data. We sent more data. They requested an assessment team. The team filed their report. And then someone decided it was not a priority." Rail nodded slowly. He was closer now. Oro was certain of it. Garo had to be certain of it too, and yet no alarm had been raised. No instruction to stop. Garo kept talking and Rail kept listening, and the distance kept shrinking in increments too small to react to. "My wife ran the children's section of the medical bay," Garo said. He was not talking to the broadcast anymore. He was barely talking to Rail. He was just talking the way pressure escapes from a sealed space when a small crack finally opens. She kept detailed records. She thought documentation would protect them. "It should have," Rail said. "But it didn't." "No." Oro pressed his back against the wall of the 4th row and tried to breathe quietly. He understood, in a distant academic way, that Rail was not doing nothing. But he could not name what Rail was doing. Every question drew Garo further into his own story and further away from the script he had brought into the room. Every agreement, not false agreement, not performance, but the kind of agreement that comes from actually tracking what someone says, kept Garo's attention on Rail's face rather than his hands. And the hands were the problem, Oro realized. If Garo stopped talking and returned to the purpose he had come here for, the hands would S.O. Rail was keeping him talking. Not by arguing, not by promising anything, just by being the first person, possibly in 3 years, who was asking Garo about Mare without also being afraid of what he might do. Professor Sova had moved. Very slightly, very slowly, she was now nearer to the cluster of students in the front rows. Protective without being obvious. Oro noted it. She was doing her own work. "The broadcast," Rail said. "What do you want people to see?" Garo's focus snapped back. "I want them to see that there are consequences. For me specifically, for humans." Rail looked at him evenly. "I wasn't part of that vote. I was 19 and working a fishing vessel off the coast of a cold country most people have never heard of. I couldn't have stopped what happened to Mare. But you benefit," Garo said, "from a union that treats some lives as worth saving and others as not." A silence. "Yes," Rail said. "So does every species with a seat at the table, including Brecken." Garo's plating flexed hard. He raised the weapon. "Don't do that." You told me to be honest, Rail said. He had not raised his voice. He had not stepped back. That is honest. The moment stretched. 43 students and one professor did not breathe, and Garo did not fire. His weapon arm stayed raised, shaking slightly at the end, and his eyes were full of something that was not the cold focus of a person completing a mission. It was the ragged, exhausted look of someone who had carried a single terrible weight for so long that putting it down felt just as impossible as carrying it further. Rail spoke quietly. You came here to be heard. You're being heard right now. The whole station is watching. It changes nothing. Maybe not today, Rail said. But you're still here. And so am I. 3 steps away now. Oro could calculate it from where he sat. 3 steps, maybe 4. Rail had crossed more than 2/3 of the lecture hall, and no one had seen it happen. Then the side corridor door opened. The second Brecken was younger than Garo. Lighter built, faster in the way young Brecken are before their plating fully hardens. He came through the side corridor at a low angle, weapon already raised, and he was aimed not at Rail, but at the cluster of students near the front. The ones Professor Sova had quietly moved closer to .it was a threat multiplier. Garo must have planned it as insurance. If the first confrontation stalled, a second point of danger would force things back to the original script. Oro saw him first. The sound came out of him before the thought did. A sharp, wordless cry. Rail was already moving when Oro made the sound. What happened next lasted less than 4 seconds. Oro watched it and could not have reproduced it in sequence if asked. There was no dramatic wind-up, no announcement of intent, no visible moment of decision. Rail simply redirected, the way water redirects around an obstacle, and he was moving at an angle that placed him between the second Brecken and the front row of students. The second Brecken fired. The shot went wide, deliberately wide. Oro realized afterward because Rail had changed the geometry of the room. By moving to where he moved, he had forced the shooter to choose between adjusting aim toward students and adjusting aim toward Rail, and the shooter had hesitated at the choice. That hesitation was enough. Rail closed the remaining distance. There was a motion, short, efficient, nothing that looked like the combat Oro had seen in historical broadcasts, nothing theatrical, and the second Brecken hit the floor. The weapon was no longer in his hands. Rail was holding it. The whole room had made a sound. Not screaming, something more involuntary than that. The sound a body makes when the nervous system reacts before the mind catches up. Garo turned that he and Rail were now facing each other from less than 3 steps apart. Rail had the second weapon. Garo still had both of his. Put it down, Garo said. His voice had cracked. Rail set the weapon on the floor. Slowly and visibly, he placed it down and straightened up. Oro made a sound of pure disbelief from the 4th row. He had just picked it up. Garo stared at him. Why? Because you didn't come here to shoot a disarmed person, Rail said. You came here to make a point. Shooting me while I'm holding a weapon proves something different than what you want to prove. It was the most words Rail had said at one time since the crisis began. They were quiet words, but they landed in the room like something physical. Garo's upper plates were moving in a rapid, uneven pattern. His eyes had the look of a person who had planned for resistance and anger and fear and found instead something he had no category for. That he fired. Not at center mass. Not aimed with the coldness of his original intention. A shot that came from a body acting before the mind had finished its argument. It caught Rail on the left arm, high, and the force of it turned him sideways. A dark line of blood appeared on the fabric of his sleeve. Rail did not fall. He took 1 step back, turned, and put his right hand over the wound. His face had changed, tighter around the jaw, something flickering through the eyes, but his feet were still under him, and his breathing was audible, and even he looked at Garo. Not with anger. Not with the look of someone calculating how to proceed. With something Oro could only describe, later, as the look of a person who had done the math and was waiting for someone else to finish doing theirs. Garo's weapon arm dropped 3 centimeters. Then the main doors came apart. Union security filled the room from 3 angles. 8 officers in full response gear, moving with the organized speed of a protocol finally completed. Liaison Pesh came in last, speaking rapidly into his collarcom. Garo was surrounded before he made a decision. His weapons hit the floor. He did not resist. He looked, in that moment, less like the man who had come in with a prepared broadcast and more like someone who had walked a very long distance and finally simply stopped. Point two officers went to Rail. One put hands on the wound. Rail let them, without pulling back, without moving away from the position he had held. His eyes tracked to the front of the room, to the students, to Professor Sova, doing a count the way people count when it matters. Everyone was still there. The students were moved out in groups. Security walked them through the main corridor in clusters of species, because certain species needed proximity to others they trusted, and the officers had been trained well enough to know that. The Devani went together. The Thessi together. The younger ones were wrapped in emergency thermal sheets, even though the station temperature had not changed. It was something to hold. Professor Sova walked out with her students. She paused at the door and turned back. She looked at Rail for a moment with her amber eyes, all four of her hands briefly open at her sides. A Thessi gesture that Oro knew meant something close to acknowledgement of a debt not yet paid. And then she walked through. Oro did not leave. He told the officer at the door that he was fine, that he would follow, that he just needed a moment. The officer looked at him, looked at Rail sitting on the lowest tier of the lecture hall steps, looked back at Oro, and let him stay. Rail was pressing his sleeve hard against his upper arm. A medic had put a temporary seal on the wound, enough to hold until the station medical team arrived. His bag was still on the stage where he had dropped it at some point during the 4 seconds, and he had not gone to retrieve it. Oro walked down the steps and sat beside him. They did not speak for a while. The amber emergency lighting had been switched off, and the hall was back to its normal warm white. It made the blood on Rail's sleeve look very dark and very real. "Were you scared?" Oro asked. He had not planned to ask it. It came out the way the warning cry had come out, before the thought completed. Rail looked at him. His face was tired. Not the performance of tiredness, not the tiredness of drama, but the flat, genuine exhaustion of someone who had spent a large amount of something that does not replenish quickly. "Yes," he said. Oro had been expecting no, or a complicated redefinition of the word scared. He had been expecting the human to describe some alternate state that looked like calm, because it functionally was calm, something biological, some Deathworlder trait that simply did not produce fear in the standard sense. "Every second," Rail said. From the moment the doors locked. "You didn't look it," Oro said. "I know." Oro turned this over. "Then how?" Rail was quiet for a moment. He looked at the stage, at the maintenance door Garo had come through, now sealed and marked with security tape. "On Earth, there's a thing that happens to you when you grow up the way we grow up. Everything can hurt you. The weather, the animals, the water, the other people. You learn early that being scared is not useful information. It tells you something is dangerous. You already know it's dangerous. What matters is what you do next. But you can still feel it." "I felt all of it," Rail said. "My hands wanted to shake. I wouldn't let them." He paused. "That's not bravery. That's just practice." Oro looked at his own hands. They were still trembling slightly. He had been in no danger. He had sat in the 4th row the entire time, and he was still shaking. "You walked toward him," Oro said. "Someone had to. There were 43 other people in that room. 43 people who had no practice," Rail said. He did not say it with pride. He said it the way you state a constraint, a factor in a problem. Gara needed something to focus on. If he had no one to focus on, the next step was the students. So he needed me. Oro processed this. "You made yourself the target on purpose." "I made myself the most manageable problem," Rail said. The medics arrived through the main door, 2 of them, with a mobile unit. They came directly to Rail, professional and quick. He let them work, turning his arm when they asked, not flinching at the cleaning agent, watching their hands with the calm attention of someone who had been worked on before. Oro watched him. He was trying to find the word for what Rail was. He had categories: soldier, Deathworlder, human, veteran, but none of them landed exactly right. They were all true, and none of them were sufficient. He thought about the moment when Rail had set the second weapon on the floor, voluntarily, in front of an armed man, and the explanation he had given. "Because you came here to prove something specific, and a different set of facts defeats your argument," as if he had been reasoning through a debate and not standing in front of 2 weapons. "On Earth, Oro said carefully, "Something is always trying to kill you." Rail glanced at him. "I said that in the lecture." "I know. I wrote it down." Oro looked at the stage. "I did not understand it then the way I understand it now." Rail was quiet. "You get used to it," Oro said. "You get used to deciding it won't be today," Rail said. "The fear doesn't go away. You just stop letting it have the wheel." The medics finished and marked him cleared for station medical. They left the same way they had arrived, brisk and efficient. Rail and Oro sat in the empty lecture hall for another minute. Then Rail stood, retrieved his bag from the stage, and slung it over his good shoulder. "Coming," he said. Oro stood. "Yes." The station had watched all of it. The broadcast note on Garo's collar had transmitted without interruption from the moment he stepped through the maintenance door to the moment he was taken into custody. 31 minutes and 47 seconds. The footage was unedited, unfiltered, and had reached 17 relay stations before Union Communications had the authorization to begin managing IT. The BY then it did not matter. The clip was already separated into its parts and moving. The part most people watched first was the 4 seconds. The moment Oro cried out and Rail moved. That piece was cut and replicated and viewed across the station net before the security team had finished processing Garo's weapons. People watched it at different speeds. Some slowed it to try to understand the geometry of what happened. Most eventually gave up and simply accepted that something had occurred that their eyes were not fast enough to follow fully. The part that stayed with people longer was the 12 minutes. That footage was not exciting to watch. It was a man asking questions and listening to the answers and moving slowly across a room. Viewed in isolation, it looked almost mundane. But the comments and discussions that spread across the station net kept returning to it, kept marking specific moments. There, that step, that agreement, that moment when he put the weapon down. The way you mark the points in a piece of music where the structure quietly changes that a Brecken elder named Hova, from a Colony 3 systems from Mar 8, sent a message to the Academy's public address. It was brief. She said, Garo used a legitimate grief as a weapon. This diminishes the grief. The human did not diminish it. He did not try to win. He tried to understand. Those are different things. Her message was the most shared thing on the station net for 4 days. Liaison Pesh submitted his incident report. In it, the breach was described as occurring once the threat profile was fully assessed and authorization was received through proper channels. The report did not mention that Rail Duno had, by the time the doors came open, already ended the crisis and taken a wound. Professor Sova read the report. She filed a formal note of disagreement with the language. She did not shout or demand. She simply noted, in clear terms, that the institutional timeline did not match the actual sequence of events and that the record should be accurate. Then she revised her course. The 3rd-week module on human conflict culture became a 4-week module. The last session was dedicated entirely to the incident, not the security response or the political context, though both were discussed, but the specific sequence of decisions made by a single person in the room before any official help arrived. She called it the difference between reacting to danger and reasoning within it. Her students debated it for weeks. Most of them could not fully systematize what Rail had done. It did not fit cleanly into any framework. It was not purely tactical, not purely psychological, not purely empathetic. It was something compound, built from parts that did not have clean edges. Oro wrote his paper on it. He spent 3 drafts trying to find the correct framework and discarded all 3. In the final version, he stopped trying to categorize and instead described, as precisely as he could, what he had observed, the steps that were not quite steps, the questions that were not quite negotiation, the moment a weapon was picked up and then set back down, the fact that Rail had been afraid the entire time and had simply decided to act anyway. His conclusion read, the human did not behave like a predator or a prey animal. He behaved like someone who had already accepted the worst outcome and therefore had nothing left to lose to fear. This is not a psychological anomaly. It appears to be a cultural product. Earth produces it systematically. We may want to study what that means for the rest of us. Oro received a high mark. Professor Sova wrote in the margin, this is the right question. 3 weeks after the incident, the Academy held its next session of Sova's class. Same room. The maintenance door had been resealed with standard hardware and showed no visible sign of what it had been used for. Oro arrived early. He chose a seat in the fourth row, same as always, and set out his tablet and stylus. A few minutes later, Rael came in. His left arm moved with a slight stiffness that would probably fade in another week. He looked at the room the way he always looked at rooms, that brief, complete, landscape-reading look, and then he walked to the back row and sat down. Sova opened the session. The topic was conflict de-escalation. She asked the class, "What do we mean when we say a conflict is resolved? Is resolution the end of the action or the addressing of the cause?" A Vekari student spoke first. Then a Thessi. The discussion moved around the room. Rael raised his hand. Oro turned to look at him. In the back row, unhurried, slightly stiff in the left arm, bag on the floor by his feet. The same bag. Still worn. Still faithful. Sova nodded to him. Resolution isn't one thing, Rael said. The action ends faster than the cause. But you still have to stop the action first, or there's nothing left to resolve the cause for. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the discussion continued. Oro turned back to his tablet and wrote at the top of his notes in small letters. "This is why the galaxy is afraid of humans and quietly glad they exist." He looked at it. He did not delete it.